beginning.
All right. Welcome to the Grief Dreams podcast. My name is Sean Ram, alongside, as always, Dr. Joshua Black. Dr. Black, how are you today?
I'm a little tired today, Sean. I got to tell you. I don't know what it was. I think because maybe I watched It last night.
Yeah, you want to tell me? Let's talk about It.
No, let's not. I had sporadic sleep. So anyways, I'm really excited to be on this podcast and then probably have a nap right after.
Did you dream about the clown in It?
No, I didn't. I didn't remember much of my dreams, actually. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I didn't. I'm not into horror movies, and that was okay. It wasn't bad. But it definitely led to a weird night. I also woke up a little bit groggy, but hey, thank goodness for coffee. Gets us going in the morning, gets me going, and gets me started on my day. Today is another great day because we get to talk to an individual who has his own grief story, and let's get right into it. So his name is Dave Marteau, and Dave is a mental health professional and a writer who has worked for 30 years with and for those close to death in hospital, rehab, prison, and hospice setting. Between 2000 and 2012, he was a clinical drug advisor to the UK government, and more recently, he has worked for the European Union and the United Nations. Dave's sister Elizabeth took her own life at 31, and his son Jack was killed crossing the road at 21, hit by a speeding driver. Dave is the author of The English Book of the Dead, which can be found at www.englishbookofthedead.com, and it is a personal and scientific exploration of mortality. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And so, Dave, where are you calling from today?
I'm calling from a town called Bournemouth. It's on the south coast of England in Europe. We're just about still in Europe. We've got a Brexit thing going on here, but I won't bore you with that.
I don't think it's boring at all.
It's driving us crazy.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we do hear about what's going on in England. I still have family in England, so I definitely, I feel a little bit alike with you guys over there. And I recently actually spoke to some gentlemen who came to visit some family that I have, and they're from England, and we had a conversation about Brexit and all this. And it's very similar to actually what we're faced here in Canada / United States in terms of political strife. Let's call it that. A lot of turmoil.
Yeah. We've got that going on. But I'm hoping to go around or above that, really, because our conversation today is going to be on a more profound level than political wranglings. We're going to talk about life and death, essentially.
Ooh, I like that. I love it. You're right. And so I want to actually begin by talking about your life.
Yeah.
And you spent 30 years in the same field, and I think that's remarkable. What got you to want to be involved with people at near death?
Well, I was sort of at a crossroads, really. I had been working in computers. This is back in the 1980s, and my wife, Debbie, and I had been traveling. And we came back to Europe from Asia, and we just felt like our lives, we didn't really want to recommit to doing the same sort of boring office stuff. And eventually, I'd always been interested in psychology, so I drifted into psychiatry / mental health. And there was a sort of personal unconscious reason as well, because my sister, who took her own life, Elizabeth, had been quite unwell during my formative years with mental health problems. And I think in a way, I was almost trying to save her, or I was trying to work out the riddle of what was the matter with Elizabeth. And so, as well as for conscious reasons, wanting to do something that was a bit more interesting than standard office work, I was also kind of trying to work out a family dilemma. And unfortunately, Elizabeth took her own life when I was just 1 year, maybe a little more into the work. I think I was in my second year, just still training. And so it's really underlined for me that I was in the right area, as well as being, desperately unhappy for my sister. I was feeling like perhaps I was doing something positive too. So I guess that saw me through.
Wow. So your sister's life ended right when yours was beginning, in the sense of that new field. Did she always have the mental
Yeah.
health issues, or was it something that just happened after maybe a traumatic event of some sort?
No, I think it was almost throughout her entire life. I remember when I was 7 and she was 9 or 10, we shared a bedroom together, and she would obsessively count the number of items in the bedroom each night before she could go to sleep. And we call that OCD now. But at the time, I just thought it was just something she did. But looking back, I could see that her mind was racing or compelling her to do things that most kids wouldn't do. So I think the warning signs were there, and then it developed into further problems, eating disorders, and then ultimately a breakdown. So, and a sequence of breakdowns to the point where she just had enough. She turned 31, and she just couldn't take it anymore. So she said to, I've got 4 sisters. She said to the sister to whom she's closest, Teresa, she said, you won't see me alive again. And Teresa said, oh, don't be so stupid, you know. She sort of thought she was half playing with her. And but they parted on a railway station and in London, and Elizabeth got on the train. Teresa walked off, and she was right. We never saw her again. She went missing, and she jumped from a cliff on the south coast here of England.
Wow, that's heartbreaking to hear that, and to not be able to help. You know, that's tough.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Sean. It's the powerlessness. You couldn't help, and in fact, she had asked if she could stay with me. I think just a few months before, but to be honest, she was so crazy and just not sleeping, and I just thought, oh, I've got a new baby in the house. I've just started this course. I don't know, you know. I thought, no, it wouldn't be a good thing. I knew it would end in disaster, you know. Because brothers and sisters fight anyway, in a funny kind of way. You know, I would have thought the wheels would have come off if she had stayed with us. So I said no, and then of course she died, and I kept feeling terrible about that, and had to resolve it in my mind. It took me about 10 years to come to the conclusion that actually, if she had stayed with me, she would have ended her own life anyway, because I couldn't make her happy. I couldn't make her demons go away, you know.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of the things people struggle with when they lose someone like that in that setting, like someone who takes their own life. You know, the friends and family around them kind of have that question in their head, like, what could we have done? You know, we didn't necessarily see the signs. And then also, obviously, like you talked about, a little bit of guilt will set in. Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. So, but there was also a part of me, I'd say 25% of me, that was happy for Elizabeth. That was happy she didn't have to suffer anymore, because she'd had loads of hospital admissions, you know. Every psychiatrist that she saw gave her some new horrible drug. You know, it was torture for her, and yet suddenly it was gone. But you know, to move it on to the subject of the podcast, I had dreams about Elizabeth that I can't recall now, and I stopped dreaming about Elizabeth quite a number of years ago. But I dreamt about her very recently, twice, very recently. And my wife Debbie's just received a diagnosis of sort of early form cancer. And so we're kind of shocked a little and sort of adjusting to that. And Elizabeth came to me in a dream twice, and it was definitely a very vivid one, because her whole form, her whole manner, her tone of her voice was completely Elizabeth, you know, even though I haven't seen her for 33 years. And And in my own mind, I thought, why should I dream about Elizabeth now? In my own mind, my sister had come to me to give some, as a show of strength, to give some support to me and Debbie. That's what I believe, because she really liked Debbie.
That's interesting. And what was the dream? Can you share it?
Well, the dream was very, very simple and very short, and it was more a case of presence rather than, I would say, plot. I was at home. At least I felt like I was at home, and my son Jack and Elizabeth were in the room with me. I didn't see them come in. They just arrived. They just materialized. And essentially what they were telling me was, you'll be okay. It'll be okay. It was unspoken, but that was the message that I felt was being communicated. Now, there are all sorts of arguments, and I respect those that say, well, this is just my unconscious offering me reassurance and doing that through the story of my dead relatives. I can see that, that's a perfectly feasible explanation. Whether it is the true explanation or not, I can never know. And I'm happy not knowing, because I've spent a lot of my lifetime not knowing things, and you get kind of used to mystery. You get to the point where mystery's okay. There's a sort of comfort in mystery.
Yeah, there's a lot of mystery around dreams and grief dreams, right? And it's one of those things, you mentioned that the kind of the main essence of her was in the dream, but not necessarily the finer details. And isn't that funny? As a general statement in life, we go through our daily life, it seems like we're more concerned with the details and less concerned with the why and the overarching reason why we're even doing what we're doing. But the dream world flipped it on the reverse and said, well, here's the most important thing, which is the feeling, the person's there, maybe words they say, maybe the look in their eye. And
oh yes,
we hear that so much that some of these grief dreams, like even my own grief dream, I saw my uncle, didn't really recognize anything around, but I saw it in his eyes and I saw him smile, and that gave me enough. And I think there's something to that. There's some science behind that. Obviously there's mystery behind it, but it's something that helps us. And it came to you in a time that you needed that help. And that's the beauty of it all, of all of it.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I like that we're fixated on detail and facts, aren't we? Yeah. Information. And in fact, just one look carries all the information or meaning that can never be communicated other ways, I think.
Yeah. No, and I like too, said you're open to the mystery. And we just had a guest on, I forget her name, but she did documentary on dreams of the dead. And she mentioned that she was having this conflict in her mind too, on like, are these visitations? Is it just the mind? And finally she just had this dream where I believe it was her mother said, just take it as a gift. And that was it. Like, so she realized these dreams are a gift, and to not worry about or wonder so hard about the mystery, because you're losing the gift that is the presence.
Yeah, the mother's a wise woman. I'll move forward now, because in 2009, in December, our son Jack was killed, as you mentioned at the start of the program. He was knocked down and killed crossing the road in Italy. And I just take a breath there. Yeah, even though it's 10 years, it's just, when you say the words and hear the words, it sort of creates a reverberation through you. But those first few months in particular, and really the first 2 or 3 years, we were in the wilderness, Debbie and I were just in such a strange land of grief. And there are a couple of things to do with grief dreams I think that are really important to say at this point. First of all, is you're existing. You probably know this yourselves. When you've really lost someone you're so close to, you suddenly exist at a slightly different frequency, is the best way I can put it. Is the world has changed its pitch You're if anything, you're a more elevated level, elevated pitch. You're living. It's almost as if your feet are slightly off the ground, and maybe through the pain, and certainly through the reality of what's happened. Is so that you don't live through many massive realities. I think for you guys in your generation, maybe 9/11 might have been one of those massive realities. I'm guessing. I don't know. But, when things suddenly burst through the everyday and you're in a different place all of a sudden, a completely different place. And we had no dreams about Jack, Debbie and I for the first few weeks or even months. And listening to your podcast, I found that's not unusual. That's so, isn't it? You tend to be a while before people have these dreams.
Yeah, that's true. And sometimes it takes years.
Right. Well, fortunately, Debbie's very conscientious at writing things down. I'm not. But she kept a sort of diary, a grief diary after Jack died. And it's only looking back, you think, well, actually, this is a really remarkable story. Because Jack died on the 5th of December. And in the following April, so we're talking about 5 months on, Debbie had her first dream about Jack, didn't you, Deb? It was very vivid. And they embraced, and Debbie said, "I miss you, Jack." And Jack said, "I miss you too, Deb," because he used to call us by our first names rather than mum and dad. And so it's very typically Jack to say something like that, and he's a very emotional guy. But also, Deb said that she could smell him, that it was Jack, not just his embrace, his touch, his look. It was the actual odor of Jack that she had in the dream. And, I've never dreamt of any smells before. So that was, I think, quite a significant thing. The second thing that was significant, and we'd forgotten this until we looked back over the notes, is that Jack's auntie, whose name is Denny, and she was a sort of super aunt to Jack, really. She spent so much of her time, because she can't have kids of her own. She spent an enormous amount of Jack's childhood with him. She had a dream, her first dream about Jack, that same night on the 20th of April. So not only had Jack come through in a way to Deb, he'd also come through to Denny that same night, although the two sisters were completely unaware that until the following day when they had a conversation, that either of them had just dreamt of Jack that night. So it's really quite a remarkable thing, I think, in retrospect.
Yeah, when you look at how rare these dreams can be, for two people to have them on the same night is remarkable. And so what was that conversation like?
I've been looking into this, and I found that there's a lot of documentary evidence about twins having the same dream on the same night, even if they might be separated by hundreds of miles. They will quite often have identical dreams on a given night. And there's, the band The Bee Gees?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, big, Saturday night fever. I like the Bee Gees. Anyway, who doesn't? And the Morris and Robin Gibb from the Bee Gees, because they're all brothers, aren't they? But Morris and Robin are twins. And Morris and Robin would have the same dreams on the same night. And Morris and Robin would dream up the same melodies. So they'd go into the studio and say, "I've got a great tune." And the other guy would play it and say, "Well, that's my tune." He said, "Well, I dreamt it last night." So this is, in other words, there's this communication that can happen when we're asleep that transmit across minds and across distances. And I think that's what happened when Jack first came through to Debbie and to her sister.
Yeah, it's curious about those situations. That's another mystery, right? Like that collective consciousness almost. Like, why is it that? Yeah. And I've heard reports of that too, like twins kind of thinking about certain things together or sharing thoughts or dreams. And I feel like it'll transcend into family as well. Whereas like maybe some of those precognition dreams are related to that as well. Like, how is this possible? And I think like the more work that scientists like Joshua Black get into it and find out a little bit more about how the brain works and how dreams work, and especially grief dreams, I think we'll get answers. But right now we're kind of like, wow, this is like magic.
Yeah, well, it is a form of magic. I agree. It's real magic. My first dream about Jack came about a month after Debbie. So I'm 5 months into bereavement, and it was very specific. Jack and I met in a sort of non-place. It was kind of misty and light, and there was just me and him in this. It wasn't even a room, and it wasn't really a geographical location. We were just together in this space, and Jack was a very up guy, usually delighted to see a very broad smile, very bright smile, and enjoyed life. But he's flat in the dream, and he's going through things a bit. And he says to me, it would help me if you were to wear one or two of my clothes each day. So I said, well, okay, Jack, okay. And the dream ended soon after that. So I got up the next day and I put on his T-shirt and I put on a pair of his socks, his stockings. And the next day after that, I put on a jacket of Jack's, or I'd even put on his underpants, stuff that, is in his bedroom we don't know what to do with. And I did that for about 6 months. Every day I'd wear at least one item, And I thought, well, thinking back, if I had a dream where somebody said to me, it would help if you walk with a walking stick, for a week, there's no way I'd do that. I just dismiss it as a stupid dream. But I woke up and I was convinced, no, there was no doubt in my mind, this is going to help Jack. It's going to help me. It's going to help Jack. I'm going to do this. I didn't even think it was at all strange, or that it might be that I cooked the whole thing up in my mind. I was convinced that Jack had asked me, and so I'd do it.
Wow. Yeah, as I was going to say, it's very interesting in these dreams how when the deceased suggests some things to do, a lot of people just do them, right? You're not really questioning them. I read a dream of someone bought an engagement ring that the person was going to buy, but told her to buy it because he wasn't going to be around anymore. And so she went out and bought the ring. And it's just like, wasn't even a question in her mind. Yeah. And so even with this, it's like, I'm glad you took that to heart and you did that, because I think there must have been a reason, right, to not only just do it, right, but to help with your grief in some way.
Yeah, it was doing me a favor too, I'm sure. You could do with every favor you can get, don't you, when you're in deep grief. Anything, like a drowning guy reaching out for any inflatable or bit of flotsam, just grab for anything. But it didn't feel like a desperate act. It felt like just a positive act to me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What was your favorite article of clothing to wear of his?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess I got a Dr. Pepper T-shirt of his, and Jack's bigger than me, and he's 6 foot. He's a big guy, and it swims on me a bit. so I tend to wear it like a pajama top now, rather than wear it out. But I love that. I feel very close to Jack. And also, there's a red and black kind of check shirt of his. I still wear it now. That does fit me, and he used to wear that a lot too. So those two are my number 1 and 2. I knew Jack was dead. I didn't have any doubt about that. When my sister Elizabeth died, I sometimes would see her in the street, but people report this a lot. It's just, somebody with dark hair walks past you, and just for a split second you think, oh, it's Elizabeth. And of course it isn't. But that's such a painful realization when you see that your mind has played tricks on you. that I just wasn't prepared to even allow that thought after Jack died. So immediately I surrendered myself totally to the idea that Jack had gone, even though, you know, it was so shocking. I was fully prepared just to let go of any hope. And so it was just a matter of living with the pain, really. And any sort of connection with Jack would lighten that pain sometimes. To the point we had videos of Jack taken just 2 or 3 days before he died in Sicily by a girl he knew. And we would watch these. I find them too painful to watch now. But at the time, in the early days, it worked the other way around, and they were very comforting. It was very comforting. I had the second dream I had about Jack, the second dream I had of Jack. I'm not too sure what preposition to use here. The second dream I had with Jack, he was altogether loads happier. He was really his old self, and he was just walking towards me, and I was walking towards him. I think it was outdoors. Pretty sure it was outdoors. And we just walked towards each other, but we didn't bother talking. We just carried on walking until we were touching each other, you know, face to face, and we just embraced. And at that point, we slowly began to rotate. And then our arms began to sort of disappear into each other's forms, and we turned into just this single entity, really. I stopped being just me, and Jack just stopped being him, and we just became one. And it was just wonderful. And that was quite a healing dream, I suppose, in a way. I mean, you know, you're a long time healing, but it was a good dream.
Yeah, see, it's an interesting one because you don't normally see stuff like that where you guys, the two, merge into one. So I'm guessing you were healing from, because you're wearing the clothes and watching the videos and grieving and mourning.
Yeah.
And this must have been did this symbolize something in the sense of how you're grieving in any way?
Yes, it would in a way, because at the time I was quite taken with what used to be called Monism, which is the idea that really any differences between ourselves is fairly imaginary or an illusion. In fact, you know, if we hate somebody, in the end we're hating ourselves, because we're all pretty well one people, and we're all just carbon, basically. We're all just a bunch of molecules from the same universe, the same event, really. We're all created in the same sort of star flashes. So really, we're all just going back to that point of creation. We belong together, which is why I believe that, for instance, you know, identical twins can have the same dream even though they're 100 miles apart. I think, you know, in many respects, they still are the same person, or you know, that same initial molecule. So I think we all are a bit. This comes back to the Big Bang and the idea of singularity. You know, everything started at this tiny point. It was ultimately small and had ultimate energy. So I think that's where we belong, in the singularity. Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful thought, and the dream kind of reflects that. It's, if you look at life like that, me and Joshua were essentially, you know, similar beings. You know, we're made up of the same things. There's very similar ideas, and whether it's, you know, you and me, Dave, or whoever it is, you know, plants and trees, if you can build a connection and understand the connection, you know, your life takes a different perspective almost, because then you're not dipping into the negative too much. You don't feel alone. You don't feel like you're you against the world, rather than, well, it's all me. It's all around me. And then it also seems to lighten up those stresses of life, those anxieties and those hardships. And look at this beautiful dream. Again, we talk about, you know, the hard reality of situations, but there's a line, and you end up crossing that line when it comes down to things in our life that are momentous, whether it's the birth of a child, whether it's the death, whether it's something significant to you, people dying, or you know, maybe I've graduated from a child to an adulthood. These are all pivotal moments where, you know, reflection is important, if not vital, in those situations. And really, they're the upper echelon type of values and ideas and topics in life. Now here's you and your son kind of connecting and merging and really
Yeah.
sharing that universal truth that you share, which is, that's just beautiful.
Yeah, it's a good one, Sean. Yeah, I was very sort of elated for a while after the dream. I mean, you have to watch yourself with grief, because you can feel good and feel, oh yeah, I've got the ship steadied now. I'm on an even keel, and then suddenly you can plummet again. And we did a fair bit of plummeting, didn't we, Deb, over the next few years. Even now, we've got to be careful. We're nearly 10 years on, but you can't take your emotional well-being for granted. You can't take your stability for granted. Sean, it's something you've got to keep working on, because it's easy to slip back and slip down.
And was Jack your only son or child?
Yeah, Jack's my only son. Yeah, and but we have a daughter, Rosie, who was very close to Jack. There wasn't much difference in age. There's only a couple of years between them, and Rosie was very devastated. And she had a very bad nightmare of Jack in the early days, where he was basically physically in a deteriorating state, I think, in a very bad way. So she had a really bad dream, and she was so bereft that she couldn't return to the family home. I mean, in the end, we left that home because Rosie said, I just can't go there. So we'd have to meet her on neutral territory around her aunties, Auntie Denny I've mentioned earlier, or we just see her in a cafe somewhere, and she was so unhappy. But she's married now, she's living in Portugal, she's just had a baby daughter, so she's a different woman now. She's ridden through it, and she's really at peace with her life. She's happy. It's great to see.
Well, it's amazing for you to see too, because as parents, not only did you lose your son and you're grieving yourself, but also your own child is also mourning. And like, how do you deal with that? Right? Like, it's such a hard position for parents to be in after a loss of a child. And so like, how did you guys find a way through it? Like ride the way? Like, how did you guys do it? Is my question.
Well, it wasn't. Yeah, it's not easy. It's a good question. You fight a bit because you're all in so much pain, but you can't make each other feel better. This is one of the cruel truths about grief shared by loved ones. Is normally if your loved one's got a problem, say they're feeling low, or they hate their job, or they're unwell, you say, don't worry about that. Look, I'll make you a nice cup of tea, and you have a chat, and you put the world right, But you can't do that with grief. You see your daughter in agony, you're thinking, well, I haven't got the first idea how to make you feel better. I tried. I said to Rosie, look, I lost my sister when she took her own life, so I know what it's like to lose a sibling. And here I am now, 24 years on, and I can mention her without pain. And I'm thinking, well, that's stupid. Oh, sorry, that's a really stupid thing to say. I did swear.
That's all right.
I said to myself, that's a very stupid thing to say, Dave, because Rosie's, she's only 24 anyway. So I'm saying it's going to take you it's going to take the entire length of your current life to feel better. So that wasn't comforting at all. So we just couldn't do it. We just had to wait until she'd worked out her own way of carrying that. She said, "Oh, people told me that I've just got to carry the burden." She goes, "But why should I? Why should I carry this burden?" I thought, well, that's a good question. I haven't got the answer to that either. Yeah. But fortunately, she did prevail. She did prevail.
That's amazing. And was the type of death a serious thing for you guys? Because he was basically killed by a speeding driver, which is a lot different what happened with your sister, right? Who was in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And so he had a lot going for him in his life. Like, was that a a huge obstacle to basically cross because
Yeah.
of the nature of the death?
Yeah, I think it makes some difference because, as I said earlier, Sean, with my sister, 25% of me was happy for her. With Jack, 0% of me was happy for him, you know, because he loved life and he had quite a good thing going, you know. He was going to live probably in South America. He spoke really good Spanish and he loved the life there. And he had loads of plans. He was a good writer. He was going to be a journalist. You know, I never heard him complain about life, really. You know, he said he didn't like responsibility a lot. Well, who does? But he was looking forward to. He did say he had nothing to rebel against us with us. You know, we were pretty easy parents, really. We hardly used to. But he was a good kid. You didn't have to tell him off very much. He didn't like being in trouble, so he sort of disciplined himself, really. Yeah, he's a good kid, and so. Just to be taken away. Yeah, I mean, I didn't hate the driver because in Italy you have to hate the culture. You know, it's a speeding culture. I love Italy. It's a beautiful country. The food's fabulous. The people have very big hearts, but they drive like maniacs. They really do. The roads are very dangerous there, and it's particularly in the south of Italy. I would say if you're going on a fly drive holiday, don't go to the south of Italy. It's really crazy. And yeah, it's true. And so really, it wasn't the individual that killed Jack. It was the culture. It was this machismo culture about drinking loads of strong coffee and driving like maniacs. And they do, you know. I just won't drive in Italy. I just won't do it.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing you bring up, because that's like, how do you come to terms with a force or a culture or a system, not necessarily an individual that you can see in their eyes and look at them and say, yeah, they took my son's life, but something else external, because, you know, like we said, in the end, we're the same. That's us, they're them, we're they're us, we are them.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult thing. Like, you know, for instance, you know, our friend Darwin Dave, his father was murdered. And, you know, all these situations, you know, or we had another guest on, their son died on a cruise ship, didn't get the medical resources he need, and ended up dying when he could have been saved over something else. And that's a tough one. And I really have a lot of sympathy and empathy for parents who go through, well, any type of death, but when there's a faceless type of force, that's intense. That's intense.
The last week I went to a city called Birmingham here in the UK to give a talk to parents who'd been bereaved either by suicide or by drug overdose. And let me tell you, that's one unhappy room. And I presented them with a lot of information because that's the sort of person I am. As we spoke earlier, I guess I'm a Westerner, you know, I'm big on detail and facts. So I presented them with the facts about suicide and, you know, because there's certain realities that transcend actually individual disturbance. For instance, as a rule of thumb, the further you are from the equator, the more likely you are to take your own life. And I know, for instance, there's quite a large problem in the north of Canada with young male suicide. Probably found if a lot of those guys moved to Montreal, some of them wouldn't have taken their own lives. I don't know. But there's also a large problem in the UK. Canada's got it too, and the USA definitely. A large drug problem. And again, you know, the further you are from the equator, the more likely you are to develop some sort of dangerous addiction. And in the UK, we're sort of, there are out of 184 countries that submit data, we're 13th for drug death. We're really bad. And so when somebody has a drug overdose, everybody says, well, who sold them the drugs, you know? And where did they get the drugs? And I was going to think, well, yeah, okay, that's one line of inquiry. You've got to follow that up. But you've also got to say, honestly, in our culture, it's not very unusual at all for young people to take drugs in quite large quantity. And sooner or later, one of them's going to make a mistake or going to be unlucky. So I guess that's another example of culture, that something's going to take us away in the psyche of the nation, or in the habit of the nation, the behavior of the nation.
I was just going to say, how I look at that is, my brain automatically kind of goes back to, well, it's not the individual, it's the system. And especially like like you mentioned Canada, when you talk about some of the northern provinces where it's isolated or small towns and drugs are more prevalent, and there's kind of like a hopelessness almost going on. These are, for me, these are the real causes. Kind of like it's a problem of the soul. And
that's right.
So if we don't support those people in our communities, our young people in those communities, and give them the tools to how to resolve these issues and come to terms with them, whatever struggles are going on in their lives, they're going to try to find answers, and they're going to go to places like drugs or whatever, and try to get that relief or ease of suffering or something, even if it's recreational, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, even to the medications that the doctors prescribe now, right? Like they're highly addictive. And so there's so many things going against people nowadays that really wasn't the case, 20 years ago, even fentanyl now. It's wild to see how the times change. And then with that, you can see the increase in the death. But I'm really glad you were able to speak. How did that feel for you? Was this one of the first times speaking to a group of people about the loss?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I speak as part of my work, but actually talking to bereaved people, a bereaved group explicitly, it was the first time. I mean, you might have been really glad, but I'll tell you, it was a nightmare. They really didn't like what they were hearing, and they were really angry and upset. It didn't end well.
I'm sorry to hear that. But you gotta laugh at it too, because it's like there's nothing you can do to make them better, right? There's not a joke you could tell to make the whole crowd laugh, right? Like it's just like they're mourning and they're coming.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was trained in the sort of towards the end of psychoanalysis, really. So there's still a bit of Freudian thinking in me, which I'm quite grateful for. And one of the bits of Freud that's really lasted is a system he developed with his daughter Anna called defense mechanisms, and he's together they said something very profound, which is I found it to be always true, which is whatever feeling you're left with after you've departed from somebody, left the company of somebody, when you leave the room, whatever feeling you're left with is the feeling that they wanted you to take with you. And it's a gift from them, And when I left the room of these parents most of whom were bereaved by suicide, I felt like I was to blame. And I thought, that's the feeling they don't want. They don't want the blame. And so to an extent I was like a scapegoat or shooting the messenger or something like that. And that's okay, because although it meant I had 2 or 3 bad days afterwards where it sort of, the negativity kind of reverberated through me, I could feel it in my bones. I got over it because I worked it out. I worked out what was going on, what the dynamic was, as we say in the trade, the psychodynamic, what was happening at a psychic level or an unspoken level. So those people are honestly, Debbie and I are so grateful that Jack wasn't murdered or he didn't take his own life, because it's a different level of pain that the parents have to go through. I think it's worse. And I thought it was terrible when Jack got killed on the roads, but having been around and met those people, like what they're experiencing is worse. Yeah,
it's I've talked to a bunch of them, and I've done talks too, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing the dreams they can have. I'll just shortly talk about that, in the sense that sometimes their main question is the why, and in the dreams sometimes they get those answers, which can really provide them great relief as they move forward in their grief. But I'm guessing with a lot of my research, a lot of the dreams people are having are negative after suicide, just because of the trauma that goes with that. And like
Yes.
and that's a hard thing. So like when you're awake, you're suffering, but also when you're sleeping, you're also suffering. And so it's just like a no-win situation for them. So hopefully one day we can figure out a way to incubate these people to have a positive dream of their loved ones in some way in the future. But I do want to actually talk about your book, because I think it's very interesting on that you even wrote this book. So when did this happen? Because you're grieving for a long time. And when did you say, you know what? I want to know more about death because I didn't see enough of it yet.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, and I'm not the only person who goes through this, I just wanted to consume everything I could about tragedy and death. So I'd watch tragic movies. If there was a sort of a murder or a young death on being reported on the TV, I'd watch it, avidly. I might even write to complete strangers who've been bereaved, saying, like, I just saw you on the telly, or I just heard about you on the radio, and I just want to say how sorry I am. Because I was just sort of surrounded and fixated by it, maybe in an unhealthy way, I don't know. But one thing I really wanted was a book that was going to explain some of this stuff and make me feel easier. And I couldn't find it. I mean, the nearest I could get to it were sort of accounts of near-death experiences, but these were nearly all from the USA. And it's a very different culture, America, to the UK culture. Canadian culture is more similar to the UK, I've got to tell you, in my experience. But with America, there's a tremendous amount of religiosity. There's a tremendous amount of sort of Christian overlay to the stories that people tell, to the point where they relate everything directly to God's will and the teachings of Jesus Christ. And I was brought up by Christians, and that sort of stuff makes me feel slightly uneasy, makes me feel a bit sick, really, or queasy. I can't. I'm not going back to religion. I'm an atheist. So what I wanted was a book that had a spiritual dimension, but was good for atheists. So that's what I did. I did a sort of atheist good book. And so that's why I called it the English Book of the Dead, because the Tibetans have got one and the Egyptians had their books of the dead. And I think we're in an age now, a secular age in the West, and certainly in the UK, where most people don't have a religion. They don't really see the point. They can't visualize a guy up in the clouds throwing thunderbolts down, or, waving his beard around. They just can't see it. And so we're on our own. And if we're on our own, what does that mean? And if we're on our own, what are we? And what is life? So because I came to this conclusion, dead is dead, yeah. When you're dead, you're dead. I'm perfectly happy with that. But then I thought, well, that doesn't tell me anything, because when you're alive, you're alive. It doesn't tell you what life is, that statement. So the statement, when you're dead, doesn't tell you what death is. It's a bit of a negative proof. It's a negative argument. So I thought, well, okay, so if death is the absence of life, what's life? So I started to investigate that through reading up on the life sciences, biochemistry, and physics. And then I moved from that to trying to work out.
Wait, hold on. Wait, how did you answer that? Hold on. So how did you answer the question of what is life?
Well, I tell you, it was difficult for me because I didn't have too much schooling. I wasn't very keen school attendee. And I certainly missed out on physics and chemistry. In fact, they wouldn't put me in for the standard qualification for school kids because I just hadn't been at school enough. So I had to sort of self-educate in that area. So I spent a lot of time on YouTube, sort of attending kiddie school classes to try and get the basics of chemistry, biochemistry. Fortunately, I got a biochemist in the family. My daughter's husband's a biochemist, so I could pick his brains a little. And I started to educate myself about quantum physics, which took forever, I got to tell you. And you can only do it to a very sort of shallow extent if you don't have degree level mathematics. And there's no way I'm going to get that because my brain just doesn't work that way. So I've had to learn narrative quantum physics, which isn't the same at all. It doesn't really exist as a term, but what I mean by that is quantum physics as expressed in words rather than numbers and symbols. And if you work it out by words, the true quantum physicists will say, "Oh, yeah, that's not true quantum physics." You know, you can't get to a level of describing subatomic phenomena just through a lexicon. You can't do it. You can only do it through numbers. So unfortunately, I only understand it to a certain extent, but I do understand it to that extent. It took a long while, and what I drew from that is that, and this is very difficult to explain. What I drew from that is there are two phenomena that seem to be absolutely essential to life, but seem to be almost impossible. The first one is superpositioning, which basically means that a subatomic particle or wave, depending on how you view it, can be in several locations at the same time. Now, in the case of an electron, this is being exploited by companies like IBM and Google to build a super quantum computer. If you can do it, you can exploit superpositioning. It means your electrons all over the place, so it can do millions of calculations at the same time instead of just the one, or the binary 1 and 0 we've got at the moment. So quantum computing, if it ever works, will prove will prove superpositioning. And what that means is we're essentially made up of atoms that can be in several states at the same time and can be in almost several locations in the same time. Now that explains, for instance, how people in different towns can have the same dream on the same night. The next thing, which is allied to it, I'll keep on talking even though it's probably meaning nothing as I issue these words. The next thing, a phenomenon called entanglement. You've probably heard of this. And the notion here is, this experiment proves this, although it makes no sense at all, is that you can have two quantum particles, in other words, two subatomic particles. You can separate them. You can have them at different ends of a country, and this has been done. They've been separated by several hundred kilometers. And as soon as you do one thing to one particle, one of the particles, the other one will become aware of it and will respond in a way that you can absolutely predict, even though it has no way of physically knowing that its partner has been in some way interfered with, say it's been passed through an electromagnet or something like that. So what this means is that even though things are physically very, very separate, they still are aware or able to communicate with each other, and we don't know how. We think it's through a thing called non-local space. And non-local space is a place that doesn't really exist in a 3 or 4 dimensional world. It has to be an extra dimension, and a lot of physicists are quite happy now that non-local space exists. In other words, there's another dimension. And my feeling is that this could be right, this could be wrong. I don't care if it's wrong, really. It's just where reading and YouTube has led me. My feeling is that, say, for instance, identical twins who can have the same thought in separate towns or come up with the same song or same new melody or have the same dream in separate towns on the same night. And the dead who come to us in grief dreams, they come to us via non-local space. There can be a non-local space where the living and the dead could actually communicate. But there certainly seems to be a non-local space where the living communicate. So it would be consistent with the stories that people have told me, because I interviewed people who'd had near-death experiences, and their experiences were so profound that they were left in no doubt that they'd been somewhere. They'd been somewhere other, somewhere else. When you're in the room and you're with that person, you're looking in their eyes and they're telling you the truth, you kind of believe them, you believe them.
Yeah, I think this is all very interesting. I think like that type of information gathering, knowledge, and writing a book about that, that's scientific inquiry, essentially.
Yeah,
Because look, at the end of the day, nobody's come back from the dead and told us what it's about in the situation. We don't get information from, the other side. So we're all kind of, in a way, guessing. So, I
yes,
was
we are.
I was thinking about this thought the other day. I'm like, the most dangerous person is a person who's 100% sure of themselves, or 100% sure of
Yeah,
everything, right? Like,
yeah, yeah,
there's so much vagueness and kind of ideas and frameworks that we're using and kind of supporting, but science tells you should always go back and question a lot of these things, because
yes,
again, I'm not knocking any type of framework or perspective. I myself come from a Christian family. I understand the importance of having frameworks and perspectives.
yeah,
But with that said, everybody has a unique and different one, and it's okay to kind of delve into the world of the magical side of things, because what you're talking about is actually real science happening, and
yeah,
we're experiencing now. We're going through the progression, and we hopefully in our lifetime we can see the real ramifications of some of the science. Perfect example is that movie
yeah.
Interstellar, where they're talking about
Oh, I
going
haven't
into,
seen that.
oh, beautiful movie. I'm not going to give away too much, but they actually talk
Oh,
about the
yeah.
fourth dimension. They talk about
Oh, okay, brilliant.
an area in that's not in our, knock on table kind of like life, or not in another
Yeah,
dimension. It's an area we can't necessarily see in whatever. And movies always reflect real life, and these movies and stuff, everything's coming out AI and people, movies
yeah,
about,
yeah,
cyborgs and whatever. But the truth is that we're all collectively as a planet trying to understand all these concepts, including death. And that's where
yeah,
books like yours are important, because, like I read in the bio, you're also looking back, you're looking anthropologically and saying, okay, well, how do we look at death in the past? And that, I think, is the best thing, is like, well,
yeah,
how do we look at it? And that's a scientific approach. What are the ideas,
yeah.
concepts that we've had? Let's retest them, and let's start to try to make sense of all this.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I do go all the way back in the book. I go back to sort of recorded history and before. So we've got archaeological evidence in this country that goes back about 7,000 years from what we call burial mounds. They're fascinating places. They're like prototype pyramids, but much shorter and squatter. But they've got chambers inside them, and they were there for sacred burial purposes. And one of the best in the country is very nearby to here. And I find it very comforting just to go inside that place. You can just go. There's not even a fence around it. You can just walk inside. You can just walk inside this chamber, and you're underground, and you're in this place that's 7,000 years old. It's one of the oldest buildings in Europe, and you can go there any time, night or day, and just hang out because nobody's interested in it.
Have a date, a little lunch date.
Yeah, bring a friend, have a party there. Yeah, I mean, it's curious that something so precious to me would have no value to modern England, but it's really not important to the English. The English aren't very interested in history.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well,
but I am.
we've kind of moved on, right? Like we've evolved, and we talked to
Mm.
yes, you got it. This guy knows me. We talked to Kevin Toulis, and he's
Oh yeah.
Irish, and talked a lot about the Irish wake and whatnot. So
Yeah.
and that kind of brings, he brought a great point. Like, we've shifted because the society has shifted into having deaths and taking care of people into hospitals. It's very
Yeah.
clinical now, probably because of
Correct.
hygiene, a lot of situations and reasons. But then you got to go
Yeah.
back and say, why did these people find it that important? What is it in death that makes people build mounds and monuments and
Mm-hmm.
mausoleums and whatever? But like some of these structures,
Yeah.
and we have them in North America and Canada a lot too, some of these mounds and whatnot. What Why was it so
Brilliant.
important for these people to have that type of critical kind of end of life, whatever
Yeah.
ceremony or thing? And that's, I think, that's a question, and that's really cool that you get to explore these things and really dig up these
Yeah.
topics. that we take for granted now. Let me go to the hospital, and my grandma's going to die and whatever, and now the pallbearers are going to take her from place A to B and all this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to jump a bit now, Sean. Sorry about this, but it's while the thought occurs to me. There's a guy in this country, he's a very old guy called Peter Fenwick, and he's one of the first guys to investigate near-death experiences, and he interviewed over 300 people, wrote a very fine book, and he's still involved in the field even though he's retired from medicine, and he's one of the things he uncovered was that as people get closer and closer to death, they're more likely to have dreams where they're visited by dead ancestors or dead friends, sometimes visited by benign strangers. And these visitors say to them, well, it's coming to the end now. And you sort of say, yeah, in your dream. And they say, look, don't worry, it's all going to be all right. And we're going to come and collect you, you're not going to be dying on your own. We're going to be ready for you over this side. And actually, we're thinking Thursday at 4:00. And Peter Fenwick said quite often it is Thursday at 4:00. They're bang on, you know what I mean? They come and get them. So even if you've got visitors, suddenly they go, oh, he just closed his eyes and he was gone. And so Peter Fenwick says that generally it's from about 4 weeks onwards, towards countdown that these dreams start to happen. Now, I've got a very good friend called Margaret, Marge, we call her, and she lives in London. And a couple of years ago, she got stage 4 cancer, and so she's dying. Yeah. So we go down to see her, and she said, "I've got to tell you, I've had a dream about Jack." Now, she's hardly met Jack in her life, because we lived in different towns, and there were quite a few years where I didn't see Marge, a lot of Marge. So all the time Jack was growing up, she never really knew him. She knew him as a little boy, but he came to her in a dream, and I think it was adult Jack, but she knew who it was straight away. And he said to her, don't worry about Chris, that's her husband, Chris is going to be okay. And Debbie and Dave, they're doing all right now. They're okay now. This is, after several years of grief, yeah. And she said, oh, I really needed to tell you this. And I said, well, he's right. Yeah, we are doing okay now, actually. Compared to how we were, we're mending. And Marge only lived 10 more days. She died. And so it was absolute textbook Peter Fenwick dream. It was very true. And moreover, Jack was right. Her husband, Chris, he went through a rough phase, but after about 12 months, he was quite a bit stronger, and he's doing okay. So we're all doing okay, and Jack was right, and Marge was dying. So that's why Jack turned up. We talked about religion and beliefs, yeah. I've got nothing against religion. It's just when they start saying, well, my God's right, so your God's wrong, and then that's where all the trouble kicks off, isn't it? So yeah, so I suppose I was being dishonest when I said I got nothing against religion. I do have one thing against it, which is what you said about how dangerous people can be when they absolutely believe one thing because they have to disbelieve everything else. So I think I'm perfectly prepared to believe that Jack really came to her in a dream. Wow. But I'm not going to build a religion around it. I'm not going to make it an article of faith. If someone say, well, that's because, Marge knew that you had a son called Jack who died, and to calm herself, soothe herself, because she knew the end was near, that she cooked the whole thing up in some daft fantasy dream. I'm prepared to believe that too. I think you should be prepared to believe anything, within reason. I'm never going to be prepared to believe the moon's made of cheese. There's too much evidence to the contrary. But there are quite a few things that I would never have considered. Because I was a lot more unbelieving as a younger bloke, and I think maybe Shakespeare found this as well. As you get older, you tend to believe in the fantastic a bit more. Certainly his last play is very fantastical, The Tempest, and you can tell it's a man who's coming to the end, really.
I think too, when it comes to religion, what's interesting is really it's about what you just talked about in your book about life and death. Like every religion, that's what it's talking about. Life.
Yeah,
Why
it's
we're
talking
here,
about, yeah.
and then what happens when we die. And it's just like people have different interpretations of that. And so I think you're right. I think it's very interesting. The topic itself, I think it's important to write on and to think about differently. When now it's all said and done, you wrote the book. What
Yeah.
else has that helped you in processing or sitting with life itself and also loss, like even the impending loss of your wife?
Yeah, researching the book and writing the case studies about other people. Yeah, that definitely helped me. Writing about Elizabeth and about Jack in the book was just horrible. I just hated every word as I was typing it. It just hurt me a lot, and I didn't find that therapeutic. I don't really believe in catharsis that much, but as to finding, what's mysterious and wonderful about life through the research, I definitely have felt some comfort. Yeah, that's the word, comfort, and that's why I wrote the book, because I wrote the book for me 6 weeks into grief. Really, it's for the me that was around 9 years ago, and so my hope is that it'll be for the people who are at that stage now. The book will help them. It's for the newly bereaved. It's not for the everyday reader, I don't think, unless they're kind of quirky.
Unless they're like us, who are
unless they're like us, yeah, that's right.
who like to inquire and
Yeah.
really absorb these topics because they are heavy. But I think if you think about them, if you dwell on them more, you start to really. For me, I think I feel compassion for people more, and especially if I talk to a griever or someone who's gone through death and loss, I feel compassion
Yeah.
for just fellow humanity. Like if we lived in like villages of 100 people, and maybe
Yeah.
there were some of them who are Christians, some of them who are, let's say, Hindu or Muslim or whatever, and you maybe
Sure.
some atheists, sprinkled in and whatnot. But like
Yeah.
I think we'd deal with issues a lot differently. I feel like we'd have more conversations. We'd be more interested in let's find out where we're similar and we have common ground, rather than, well, you're on team X and I don't really jive with that, so we're going to separate
Right.
ourselves. And I think
Right.
we can't go back to those type of lifestyles because population is crazy these days, especially in England. It's so crazy there. but
Yeah.
but at the same time, you could do that with the people around you. You could do it at work. You could do it with your neighbors. You could do it with family members.
Yeah.
And having a level of compassion and understanding that, hey, not everybody shares maybe the same framework that I share, or
Yeah.
looks at the world the same way I do. But
Yeah.
take death, for example. No one's for sure seen the end. So
Yeah.
I think it's great, and it stimulates conversation. If people ask questions or say, hey, how does your religion, or how do you view death, or how does, under your religion's framework, how do you look at this? And then also, have those talks and talk about it. We really don't have conversations anymore.
I think they have a word for that, Sean. It's called a death cafe.
There you go.
Yeah.
See, that's the crazy thing. Isn't that the crazy thing, that we're creating spaces in today's day and age to have those conversations because we normally don't? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm all
having
for it, and it's great. And we're going to start this new podcast. We'll talk about that later. But it's at the same time amazing,
Well, maybe that's what the podcast does too. It's a place. The podcast is almost a place, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where conversations can be had and ideas can be developed and floated. Yeah. So yeah, we're recreating the village all the time, I suppose.
I like that. Getting back to the nitty gritty, I think we need to go back to basics. Technology might not take us where we need to go now, but back to the very simple idea of, talking to that person who lives next door to you. And, especially if, there's tension or something, or you've never talked. I have a neighbor in the back. I've never talked to this person. I
Right.
see them all the time, and someday
Yeah.
it's too awkward now because both of us
Go
haven't
do it
died.
tomorrow. You got to do it now. You mentioned it.
I
You
got to do it
tomorrow.
now. Now that I've mentioned it on the podcast, I'm gonna wave at this dude and see what's up.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't tell you what his response will be because I'm not supposed to swear on this show.
That's funny.
No doubt he'll be delighted.
Hopefully.
Well, we don't know, do we? Yeah, it's a way of getting rid of, I suppose, dangerous fantasies about one another. I guess that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I'm sure that person is got some whatever ideas preventing them from saying hi to me, and I've got some preventing me from saying hi to them, and it's just a matter of like, well, let's shed those kind of biases and kind of assumptions about each other. At the end of the day, we live next to each other. It's okay to set up a rapport.
All right. So for our last question of the podcast, we always like to ask, what dream, if you could have one tonight, would you want of someone who's died?
Oh yes, I've heard this question and I haven't given it any thought at all. I just want to, and in a way I've already had it, but I just want to see Jack looking happy. When the happiest I've known him really is when he was just wearing a dressing gown and pajamas, and it's 3:00 in the afternoon and he's eating potato chips or something, watching TV. But he used to like bad TV. If there was a show that was really bad, he just loved watching it and laugh at it. Or there's a really cheesy movie, those 80s movies he'd love.
I like that. No, it's it's one of those memories you have, you want to sort of experience again. And I'm actually really curious, would you want to be able to smell him in the dream?
You could smell those potato chip off his fingers.
Share those, yeah. And I think we watched Back to the Future because that's his favorite film, the first one.
Oh, that's a classic.
And Groundhog Day, that's probably his second favorite.
Bill Murray, a little bit of Bill Murray going on.
Bill Murray, absolutely, yeah. He loved all that stuff. He said he hoped time travel would never get invented because somebody might go back in time and stop Back to the Future being made, which would be a terrible thing. So I'd watch Back to the Future with him, and we'd recite the dialogue because we know what's coming next, and laugh. I think that would be the dream. Yeah, we laughed a lot. The laughter stopped to a large extent, but also, and I found this. I don't know whether you guys have found the same. That actually, you can still laugh through the tears with grief. It's a depression where you still have a sense of humor. It's a bizarre thing. So you're hurting like hell, but there's some stupid comedy thing, or somebody says something, he comes up with a one-liner, and you can still laugh. It's curious.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's life, and it's okay to kind of let humor enter in, even in your darkest days. It's one of the reasons why we never shied away from telling jokes or laughing on the podcast, because we wanted to show people that there's another side. We used to, when we first started, we used to tell people what we do. Oh, we got a podcast on grief and loss and dreams, and they'd say, wow, isn't that dark? Like, isn't that morbid? Like, how do you guys keep talking about it? And I'm like, well, if you listen to the podcast, we actually do laugh a lot. But isn't it amazing with even the dream that you want? It's kind of like, as a parent, to see your child happy, to see them content. It's less about you. It's less about you. It's not, you're not asking for them to come tell you, what the lottery numbers are for next week or whatever. You want them, right? You want you want to see him happy. And that's a beautiful thing. And I love that because, that's what loving parents do, is they care, they worry when you're out at night. They feel better when you come back home. That's what a parent is, and so it's such a beautiful dream, and I hope you get to have that. Dave, this has been a fantastic conversation. Could you actually shoot out your website and where people can find the book?
It's www.englishbookofthedead.com. So just English Book of the Dead. If you search on that, all one word. I know it's not all one word, but that's how it is on the website.
Yeah, I think people will find it. I found it pretty easily, so I hope people can go check that out, especially if you found some of the stuff Dave was talking about interesting, as I did. I love hearing a different perspective, because sometimes in the grief world you get one perspective, which is maybe a person's opinion about what the grief they went to, or maybe you get the academic side which talks about what's going on. But what you've done is kind of extrapolated various ideas and kind of give us something to think about, which I think is really cool.
Thank you. Well, on the website there are there's a sample chapter, and there's also other sort of extracts from the book, so people can get a flavour of it if they haven't already. And any money we make from the book goes to a bereavement charity called Compassionate Friends, and it's going all right. It's going all right.
Well, that's fantastic.
So far, yeah. So hopefully we'll put some good back, where there's been.
Well, I think you already did. You're living and you're laughing, and so at the end of the day, that puts a lot of people around you in a better spirit. So good for you for doing the work and working with that grief. And
thanks, Joshua. Well, no, that's that's great. That's great.
All right, Dave. So people can check out our platform at griefdreams.ca for more information on the topic. We added a donation button, and there are perks to those who donate. If you have Facebook, you can join the Grief Dreams group. You can share your dreams or hear more dreams of others. We are on Twitter and Instagram at Grief Dreams and at the Grief Dreams Podcast. And as always, we love to end our podcast with love and gratitude from us to you.
I have questions. I have introduced myself. You have introduced yourself. This is a very good conversation.